I'm Charles Bennett, lay leader and lay delegate to annual conference. At General Conference in Charlotte, the United Methodist Church continues to make historic gains in inclusion while beating back attempts from global Methodist simpaticos to hijack the narrative. And that brings us to episode 3 of a segment I like to call Full Court Press. First off, if you would like to learn more about Week 1 of General Conference, please watch episodes 1 and 2. They not only summarize the goings-on, they also provide important organizational context and explain the regionalization plan that will prove to be one of this conference's main accomplishments. Sunday was a day of rest for General Conference delegates. Many worshipped in local Methodist churches, including First UMC of Charlotte, where Bishop Cedric Bridgeforth was a guest in the pulpit. Others used this opportunity to enjoy a good meal and take in the non-ecclesiastical elements of Metrolina. Monday's message was delivered by Bishop Karen Oliveto, LGBT and Metho-nerd, of the Mountain Sky Conference, speaking to a need for inclusion in ministry to everybody in the kingdom, while hearkening back to a history of frontier circuit riders that her family, Bishop Dottie's family, and my family are all part of. Also, a random aside, some of the pictures from General Conference were taken by Paul Jeffrey, who our church had previously employed to take pictures of the Philippines that are hanging in our hallway. Delegates received reports from the United Women in Faith and Africa University. Monday was the day of the nominations report, and time was also spent on improving reorganization of the conferences and bishops of Africa. Delegates approved an apology for the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, a legislative priority for those in CalPAC. National plans were approved for ministering to African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and the deaf. A long list of resolutions pertaining to racism, sexism, and economic injustice were passed, as was a re-condemnation of Israeli settlements and an urge for an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Monday was also the day when 3 law enforcement officers were shot and killed, just a few miles from the General Conference, an event that touched General Conference delegates. Tuesday could best be described as Ecumenicalism Day. The speaker on Tuesday, April 30th, was African clergyman Jerry Pillay, the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, speaking on the subjects of ecumenicalism and injustice. Pillay, fresh off a trip to Sudan, reminded Methodists to seek mercy for those suffering there in Palestine and in Ukraine. On Tuesday, the conference voted to lift a ban on Methodist funds going to LGBT-related causes, a ban that, among other things, made it difficult to respond to the AIDS pandemic and to suicides of transgender youth. They also struck down the language barring the ordination of LGBT clergy, although such language had been ignored in California for years, and removed mandatory penalties for performing same-sex weddings. Methodists approved a full communion resolution with the Episcopal Church and Moravian Church. Modifications were also made to the social principles concerning sustainability and economic injustice. Methodists also became the first denomination to condemn the persecution of Christians in India. On Tuesday, there were further peaceful protests on the injustices committed in Palestine, calling for a divestment from Israel, and there was discussion on budgeting priorities. Wednesday's worship was led by Bishop David Wilson, the first Native American United Methodist bishop. Wednesday morning saw an elimination of the ban on self-avowed practicing clergy and the removal of a ban on Methodist clergy performing LGBT weddings, both passing on the consent calendar by overwhelming margins. The removal of these clauses resulted in much rejoicing from progressive and reconciling Methodists. Bishop Oliveto and her wife wept for joy. This brings Methodism in line with most other mainline Protestant denominations, who removed this language some time ago. I would note that while LGBT clergy and weddings will now be allowed in Methodism, they will not be compelled of congregations that do not want them. Where are we at on regionalization and disaffiliation? By the end of day Wednesday, all 8 of the regionalization petitions have passed the body. Regionalization proposal number 5, regarding the creation of a U.S. Central Conference, was pulled from the consent calendar, and Wesleyan Covenant allied delegates attempted in vain to amend it with the revised disaffiliation proposal. This is where I point out that we recently completed a 4-year window of time for churches to disaffiliate on generous terms. On Wednesday, a motion to remove language about disaffiliation, as opposed to extending it, passed with 71% support. However, a proposal to require conferences to develop a re-affiliation path also passed. Finally, one last thought. How are social media and mainstream media covering this? Is there any good to be gained in using them to learn more about General Conference? First, social media. I have monitored what's been going on, particularly on Twitter X, and there is no point in you monitoring General Conference using social media, none. Social media is using General Conference as yet another battle in the endless culture wars going on in this country, with some of the loudest voices coming from people who have already left for the GMC or who were never Methodists in the first place and are using General Conference as a means of scoring cheap points against perceived enemies. On Tuesday, the General Conference was mentioned in the news rundowns on both National Public Radio and the PBS NewsHour, and again on Wednesday. And this week, an Associated Press write-up appeared in the Whittier Daily News. Mainstream media is more useful than social media, but it's not perfect either. A couple of months ago, PBS NewsHour did a piece on the UMC-GMC schism, but they only talked to people from Oklahoma. To really get an accurate picture of General Conference, you need at least 3 voices. 2 American Methodists from different parts of the country and or different political viewpoints, and an international voice as well. If you see coverage of General Conference or Methodism in the news, and it doesn't have those 3 voices, be aware that it might not be giving you the whole picture. In the closing days of General Conference, removal of the incompatibility clause that had claimed an LGBT lifestyle was incompatible with Christian teachings will be voted on. This weekend, I'll wrap up General Conference with another episode of Full Court